I woke up that morning expecting the crisp winter air, the scent of fresh pine, and the simple satisfaction of building a roaring fire in my living room. Instead, I was met with an empty space where my neatly stacked firewood had been the night before. At first I thought maybe I'd miscalculated. Had I burned more than I thought? Had I lost my mind? But no. Just yesterday I had spent an hour stacking it perfectly, making sure it was dry and ready for the season. Now it was just gone. Not a single log remained. Someone had taken it, and not just a few pieces. They had wiped out my entire supply, right down to the last splinter. Annoyance turned to suspicion as I stomped back inside and pulled up footage from my security camera. If some raccoon had developed an unholy craving for seasoned firewood, I needed to see it. But what I saw on the screen was far worse. There she was. Karen Aretha, the self-appointed queen of the HOA, the woman who had made it her mission to micromanage every inch of this neighborhood. She wasn't even trying to be sneaky. With her ever-present smug expression, she strutted up to my firewood pile in broad daylight, barking orders at some poor neighbor who'd probably made the mistake of walking too close. With a dramatic wave of her hand, she gestured toward two hired movers, clearly in on her latest power trip. They started hauling my wood into the back of a pickup truck like they owned the place. She didn't pause. Didn't flinch. No note, no explanation, no warning, just took it. Disbelief gave way to fury, setting my jaw tight. I already knew what her excuse would be. She'd claim some violation, say my firewood wasn't aesthetically pleasing enough for her royal standards. Maybe she'd say it was a fire hazard, even though half the neighborhood had similar stacks. But that didn't matter. Karen made the rules, and Karen decided when to break them. Fueled by pure indignation, I stormed down the street straight to her house, which of course looked like the HOA headquarters. Overdone holiday decorations, an unnecessary American flag display, and a mailbox that sparkled like it had been polished by hand that morning. I barely had to knock before she threw open the door, already looking irritated, as if my visit was an inconvenience. Before I could speak, she put on that fake customer service smile. "Oh, Brian, good morning. What a surprise. What can I do for you?" "You can start by explaining why you stole my firewood," I said, arms crossed. She had the audacity to scoff. "Stole? Brian, that's a rather strong word. I merely repurposed it, for the good of the community." Repurposed it? I narrowed my eyes. That was my firewood. I paid for it, I stacked it, and now it's gone. Karen tilted her head like she was speaking to a child. "Brian, you know the HOA has standards. Your stack was unsightly. It clashed with the aesthetic harmony of the neighborhood. I did you a favor by removing it." I gritted my teeth. "It was in my backyard. No one could even see it." "That's not the point," she said, with a dismissive wave. "The HOA's annual bonfire is coming up, and we needed extra firewood. Your pile was the closest and most convenient." I laughed, humorless. "So you just helped yourself to my property because it was convenient?" Karen sighed, clearly bored. "Oh, Brian, it's just firewood. Why are you making such a fuss? You can always get more." I clenched my fists, trying to stay calm. Karen had a way of making everyone feel like the crazy one, like their perfectly reasonable anger was irrational. "Fine," I said, stepping back. "If that's how you want to play it, Karen, go ahead. Enjoy the firewood. Just know you've made a huge mistake." She laughed that condescending little laugh of hers. "Oh, Brian, you're always so dramatic. It's just firewood." I walked away, already crafting my next move. Karen had been running this neighborhood like her personal kingdom for years, bullying people into obedience with her arbitrary rules. But this time, she messed with the wrong person. She hadn't taken the firewood out of need. She'd taken it out of entitlement. Because she thought she could, I headed straight for my garage, an idea already forming. A brilliant, devious idea. Karen wanted my firewood, then she could have it. I rummaged through my supplies, gathering everything I needed: a few hollowed-out logs, a bag of fire ants, tiny, angry creatures with a bite that could make a grown man cry, and just enough patience to wait for the perfect moment. Karen had declared war without knowing it, and I had the perfect counterattack. I sat in my garage, admiring the logs I'd prepared. If Karen wanted to take more firewood, I'd make sure she got exactly what she deserved. There was something poetic about it. She'd taken from me under the guise of community service, and now she would sabotage herself without even realizing it. I opened the container beside me, peeking inside. The fire ants were swarming, twitching with energy. My little army was ready. I had spent hours ensuring everything looked perfect. The logs were the same size, same cut, same natural imperfections as the originals, but each had been carefully hollowed out, with tiny entry holes just large enough for the ants to nest. They wouldn't escape until the heat of the fire drove them out in a frenzy. In my mind, the scene played out like a masterpiece. Karen, smug as ever, tossing my generous contribution into the flames, completely unaware of the chaos she was about to unleash. The next morning, I stacked the logs near the garage, making it look like I'd simply replaced what had been stolen. Karen was predictable. She couldn't help herself. I didn't have to wait long. Just as I finished my morning coffee, I saw her, standing at the edge of my yard, hands on hips, scowl locked on my new pile of firewood. She didn't hesitate. With the same entitled stride, she marched over and waved her movers forward. I could hear her barking orders even from inside the house. That evening, the whole neighborhood gathered for the HOA's annual bonfire. Karen, naturally, stood front and center, microphone in hand, soaking up the attention like a sunbather at high noon. She launched into a speech about community unity and personal sacrifice, taking credit for everything, including the firewood, of course. Then came the moment. Karen, in dramatic fashion, picked up one of the hollowed logs, held it up like a trophy, and tossed it into the fire with a flourish. The crowd clapped. For a moment, everything was normal. Then the ants woke up. At first, just a few confused explorers crawled out, seeking an escape from the rising heat. Then chaos, dozens, hundreds, thousands. Fire ants burst out in every direction, crawling, biting, swarming. Karen screamed. An ear-piercing shriek as ants surged into her sleeves, down her back, up into her carefully styled hair. She stumbled backward into the refreshments table, cider soaking her clothes just as the ants dug in deeper. People jumped from their chairs. Marshmallows flew, tables toppled. Someone knocked over a bowl of dip that splattered across a woman's sweater. It was beautiful. Karen, still flailing, tried to run, but tripped, face-planting into the marshmallow station. When she stood up, her face was coated in goo, her hair tangled and crawling with ants. The HOA vice president, Robert, shouted, "Someone help her!" No one moved. Finally, Karen screamed again and made a break for it, sprinting across the lawn and diving straight into the lake. When she emerged, gasping and drenched, the entire neighborhood had erupted in laughter. That night, as I sipped cider from the back of the crowd, several neighbors gave me knowing glances, but no one said a word. Karen's reign of terror was over. And the best part? She'd done it to herself. Her signature scowl locked onto my freshly stacked firewood. Without hesitation, and with the same ridiculous audacity as before, Karen Aretha marched right over, waving her arms like some kind of HOA overlord. Her hired movers fell in line immediately, clearly used to her bossy antics. From inside my house, I could still hear her self-important voice barking orders about how this was necessary for the HOA event. I leaned back in my chair, coffee in hand, smiling as the truck rolled away. Everything was set. All I had to do now was wait. That evening, the neighborhood gathered for the HOA's annual bonfire, a community tradition, as Karen would call it. She stood front and center, naturally, basking in the glow of attention like it was a spotlight made just for her. Microphone in hand, she gave a speech laced with condescension, praising herself for organizing such a beautiful evening of togetherness. She thanked the HOA board, she thanked the volunteers, but most of all, she thanked herself. Meanwhile, I was standing at the back of the crowd, arms folded, watching it all unfold like a stage play I'd already seen 100 times, except this time I'd written the final act. The fire pit crackled warmly, people sipped cider and laughed. The atmosphere was almost pleasant, until it was Karen's moment to shine. As expected, she insisted on throwing in the first log, making an over-the-top production of it. She lifted the hollowed-out fire ant bomb like it was some kind of sacred relic, turning dramatically to the crowd before tossing it into the flames with a theatrical flourish. The crowd clapped. The fire roared to life. For a second, everything was normal. Then the ants woke up. At first it was just a few confused little creatures crawling out of the log, their tiny legs twitching from the heat. But then the rest followed. Dozens turned to hundreds, hundreds to thousands. It was a full-blown exodus, a frantic escape from the blazing wood. The pit turned into a fountain of biting chaos as fire ants poured out in every direction. The first scream came from Karen herself. She was closest to the fire and therefore first in the line of battle. She shrieked, an ear-piercing guttural sound, as ants crawled up her sleeves, into her hair, down her back. She swatted wildly, stumbling backward into the refreshments table, knocking over a massive bowl of cider that soaked her from neck to knees just as the ants really started to bite. The panic spread like wildfire. People leapt from their seats, knocking over folding chairs, sending s'mores supplies flying in every direction. One kid kicked over a tray of marshmallows that landed squarely on Karen's cider-soaked outfit, turning her into a sticky, ant-covered disaster. Still screaming, Karen spun in circles, her hands flailing like windmills. "Fire hazard! Bioterrorism!" she shrieked, while the entire neighborhood watched in stunned, slightly horrified amusement. Robert, the HOA vice president, was the first to react. "Somebody help her!" she yelled, but nobody moved. Nobody dared. Karen stumbled again, this time tripping over a fallen chair and falling face first into the remnants of the marshmallow station. When she sat up, her hair was matted with sugar, her face a melted, gooey mess, fire ants still clinging to her like they were in it for the long haul. It was so absurd, so perfect, I had to bite my lip to keep from laughing out loud. She looked around desperately, realizing no help was coming. With a final, inhuman shriek, she turned and bolted, barreling through the crowd, across the park, and straight into the lake near the edge of the event grounds. With an enormous splash, she flung herself into the water, emerging seconds later gasping and drenched. Her carefully styled hair now hung over her face like a curtain of wet spaghetti. She looked like a defeated sea monster. The entire neighborhood stood frozen. And then, like dominoes, the laughter began. It started as a few chuckles. Then it spread ripples across a pond of pent-up frustration, until the whole event exploded with laughter. Even Robert, still clutching her clipboard, doubled over in tears. Karen, now soaked and humiliated, dragged herself out of the lake like a shipwrecked sailor. She didn't speak, didn't try to salvage the moment. She just stomped toward her car, her marshmallow-stained clothes clinging to her like a badge of shame. She slammed the door, started the engine, and drove off into the night. She left behind the most unforgettable HOA bonfire in history. I stood near the back, sipping my cider, enjoying every second of it. Karen had finally faced the consequences of her unchecked entitlement, and the best part, she had no one to blame but herself. As I turned to leave, a few neighbors caught my eye. They didn't say anything, but their smirks said it all. They knew, and they weren't going to say a word. The next morning, the neighborhood was buzzing. Group chats were flooded with gifs, memes, and whispered retellings of Karen's watery escape. Some said she screamed so loud she set off car alarms. Others swore she swallowed a marshmallow whole and nearly choked. The story was already turning into legend, each retelling more dramatic than the last. And I was perfectly happy to let it grow. Karen's house, usually alive with HOA activity, was quiet. No passive-aggressive notes taped to mailboxes. No emails about trash bins left out too long. It was as if the queen had abandoned her throne. I figured she was licking her wounds, plotting her next move, trying to find a way to spin the story in her favor. That was her way. Never admit defeat. Always double down. But by that afternoon, the first sign of her comeback arrived. An email. Subject line, urgent HOA meeting. Demand. Of course, it was dramatic. The body of the email was even better, full of phrases like gross misconduct, serious safety violations, and an attack on the stability of our community. She was clearly planning to frame herself as the victim and paint the bonfire disaster as sabotage. I almost felt bad for her. Almost. The meeting was scheduled that same evening at the community center. By the time I arrived, the room was packed wall to wall. Residents stood shoulder to shoulder, murmuring with anticipation. A few folks gave me nods or discreet grins as I walked in. Karen was already there, seated at the front like a disgraced monarch. Gone was her usual prim composure. Her hair was still a little frizzy from the lake, and her forced smile twitched with frustration. She cleared her throat, trying to regain command. "Thank you all for coming," she said, voice tight. "We have a very serious matter to address. Last night's bonfire event was sabotaged, an act of vandalism that endangered residents and humiliated our community. I intend to hold the responsible party accountable." Her gaze swept the room and landed on me, a second too long. A few people exchanged glances. Then Robert spoke up, slow and measured. "Karen," she said, "before we start tossing around accusations, maybe we should talk about how the firewood got there in the first place." Karen blinked. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Robert continued, "didn't you take that firewood from Brian's property without his permission?" A ripple of murmurs. Karen's face twitched. "Oh, please," she scoffed. "It was for the community. His pile was unsightly. It violated aesthetic standards." "There are no such standards in the HOA bylaws," Robert replied, eyebrow raised. Karen stumbled. "I was acting in the best interests of—" "You stole his firewood," a deep voice boomed from the back. Mr. James stepped forward, cane in hand. "Then you threw it in the bonfire, and now you're mad 'cause it blew up in your face? That's karma." The room erupted in laughter. Karen flushed crimson, gripping the edges of the table like it might keep her afloat. "I move to hold a vote," Robert said, "to remove Karen Aretha as HOA president." For a moment, Karen stood frozen. Then the hands started going up. One after another. More than half the room. It was over. Karen stood, her voice shrill with desperation. "You're making a mistake. You need me. This community needs me." But no one was listening. The vote had been cast, and Karen Aretha's reign was done. Karen Aretha sat at the front of the room, hair still frizzy from her embarrassing dip in the lake, her expression taut with barely contained frustration. She was trying desperately to regain control, but the truth was, she'd lost something vital the night before. Her authority. She cleared her throat, trying to project her usual commanding presence. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," she began, her voice a touch too sharp, a little too rehearsed. "We have a very serious issue to address today. Last night's bonfire event was a disaster, a disgrace to our community, and it was all due to a deliberate act of vandalism." A few chuckles rippled through the room, but Karen pressed on, refusing to acknowledge them. "Someone," she said, locking her gaze onto me a second too long, "intentionally tampered with the firewood. That person placed hazardous, insect-infested logs into the pile, causing chaos, injury, and reputational damage to the HOA. This was an attack on our way of life, and I demand that the responsible party be held accountable." She paused, expecting a wave of support. Instead, the silence in the room was deafening. People shifted uncomfortably. Then, from the back, someone snickered. Karen's jaw clenched. Robert, the HOA vice president, finally broke the silence. His voice was calm, deliberate. "Karen, before we go throwing accusations around, maybe we should first discuss how the firewood even got there." Karen blinked, caught off guard. "What do you mean?" she asked, suddenly defensive. Robert leaned forward, clasping his hands. "Well, unless I'm mistaken, didn't you take that firewood from Brian's property without his permission?" A low murmur swept through the room. Karen's face twitched. She tried to brush it off with a laugh. "Oh, please. It was for the good of the community. His firewood was in violation of aesthetic standards." Robert raised an eyebrow. "You mean the aesthetic standards that don't actually exist in our HOA guidelines?" Karen stiffened. Her argument was crumbling in real time. "I was acting in the best interest of—" she began. But she was cut off by a deep, gravelly voice. It was Mr. James, one of the oldest and most respected residents. "Karen, you stole that man's firewood, then you threw it into a bonfire in front of the whole neighborhood, and now you're mad because it backfired on you? Sounds like karma to me." Laughter erupted, louder this time. Karen flushed a furious red. Her tight grip on control was slipping with every second. People were no longer afraid of her. The room had turned. "I move to have a vote," Robert announced, rising above the noise. "A vote to remove Karen Aretha from her position as HOA president." A hush fell for a moment. Then the room exploded with voices. Heads nodded. Whispers became shouts. Karen stood up, horrified. "You can't be serious," she sputtered. "I've dedicated years to this community. I've made sacrifices." "You stole firewood, ruined the bonfire, and nearly caused a neighborhood riot," someone shouted from the back. "You fined people for having garden gnomes," another added. "You wrote me up for leaving my porch light on too late," a woman chimed in. "You banned lemonade stands," a kid shouted. That was it. The room erupted again, this time in boos and laughter. People waved their hands and shouted for the vote. Robert, struggling to hold back a smile, raised his hand. "All in favor of removing Karen from her position?" Dozens of hands shot into the air, more than enough. Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. She turned to the crowd, desperate, voice shaking. "You're making a mistake. You need me. This community needs me." But no one was listening. The vote had been cast. It was over. Karen let out a guttural sound, part scream, part growl, and stormed out of the community center. The door slammed shut behind her. The room burst into applause and cheers. That night I sat on my porch, a fresh stack of legally owned firewood beside me. The air was crisp, the sky clear, the perfect kind of evening for a small, peaceful bonfire. A few neighbors stopped by, laughing, clapping me on the back, sharing drinks, enjoying the kind of camaraderie we hadn't felt in years. Karen's reign was over. The HOA was free. And for the first time in a long time, this neighborhood felt like a real community again. I raised my cup of hot cider, smiling to myself as I stared into the fire. "Here's to justice," I murmured, tossing another log into the flames, and for once I could enjoy it in peace. Sometimes the line between justice and revenge is drawn with a single log. When I woke up that winter morning, all I wanted was a fire. What I got instead was a stolen pile of firewood, taken by none other than Karen Aretha, the self-declared queen of the HOA. No warning, no note, just a smug smile and a pickup truck full of my property. But here's the thing about people like Karen. They think they can take without consequence, that their title makes them untouchable. She was wrong. I didn't yell, I didn't rant. I planned, and what followed was poetic justice, with a little help from a few hundred angry fire ants. In today's world, too many people let themselves get steamrolled by rules they never agreed to, or by bullies hiding behind bureaucracy. Don't be that person. Stand your ground, know your rights, and when the moment calls for it, fight smart, not loud. If you've ever dealt with an HOA horror story, or just love a good tale of sweet, fiery revenge, hit that subscribe button and follow the channel for more real-life drama from the front lines of neighborhood warfare. This is HOA Revenge, where the petty meets poetic.